Hey, welkom allemaal to the Benny Rene Show. Benny, wat is dat hier vandaag?
Sehr gut.
Ja?
Gut, hier mal was zu sagen.
Ja, dat je wahrscheinlich wie mal een podcast maken da.
Was hier ist?
Ja, ik had laatst een jemand van een gezegd, hij had de podcast nu al 3 of 5 Mal alle gehoord. Dat we nu al bald tijd wie man wat niet meer deuten. Ja.
Wir haben noch gut viel gefragt und weißt du, was noch einmal einreichtig beim Frau bleibt?
Wat staat?
Kannst du mir die clearen checken?
So, ik geloof dat is wie die ganz, wat ze net nog ongevraagd hebben, niet?
Yes.
Dat ben ik clear.
Yeah,
Dat die blijven en gelen en roda en gereinen.
that's right.
Nee.
Aber das mal haben wir wat onder.
Demo hebben we met er nog wat anders. So, dat is nu een stout 3. Dat kan Monaten zijn, niet?
Meest een jaar.
Ja, vielleicht een jaar. Dan maken we een podcast. En die podcast die we, wo wir uns eingeholen vertellen van deze ene community.
Ich glaube Ihnen an, dat een andere Weg van leven.
Een andere weg van leven, ja, dat kunt staan. En wat vertellen we op de podcast, Benny?
Ich guess bloß von das eine Gruppe Menschen, die wir gefunden haben in den States, die da in einer Community leben und auf einem ganz anderen Weg basically leben, aufleben dann. Und so wir haben da zusammen geshared, aber das mal haben wir diese Menschen gerade eingeladen, zusammen von der Lehrer von da und früher die viele Frauen, nicht so?
Ja, so de nächste podcast die we worden gaan, en dit wordt ook alle op YouTube video's zijn. So dat is een ding van wat we al lang gaan, dat we wel mal een dag onze podcast op YouTube opnemen, dat die ook te zijn ging. Dat we veel nog ongevraagd ook. En so dat vangen we hier nu krijgen met al deze entrevistas, met deze platicas krijgen aan. En we gaan dat weer in 2 maanden, wat we van Waco, Texas komen, niet? En so we gaan we hebben een zeer schöne tijd gehad, een deel vrouwen gesteld, en een deel geleerd door. En werkelijk, ik mag zeggen dat we een fijne tijd.
Das ist sehr schön.
Dus dat ging zeer schön. Ik geloof dat er nog meer informatie in de toekomst komen, maar voor nu, dat zijn 3 verschillende podcasts, niet?
Von ungefähr eine Stunde lang geht das.
Ah, okay, so, dat we van ungefähr 40 bis 1 Stunde lang jeder Podcast, nicht?
Yes. Und dann hier ist das Ding, die sind auf Englisch, nicht auf Plattdeutsch.
Nicht auf Plattdeutsch, klar. So wir waren in diesem Video, was wir hier in diesem Podcast, was wir hier nicht mehr nehmen, wo wir für jeder ein von den Podcasts dann so anbauen, hat Jana gesagt, dass der Plattdeutsche Part erst kommt, dass die Menschen weiternehmen.
Und was das geht?
Und was das geht. Und wir machen alles in Englisch ist. Sie können nicht Plattdeutsch, sie können bloß Englisch.
Ja.
En zo doen we müssen wir die ganze Entrevista in Englisch haben. Aber dort, ich glaube, da ist ein Teil Material, ein Teil Antworten von Leuten nehmen, von der Entrevista. Wenn sie werden sehr ab mit ihren Antworten. Ich glaube, die Frauen, die werden nur von gestellt, tun nur, was ein Teil Menschen auch noch gefragt haben.
That's right.
Nicht? Dat is een community, best een klein beetje holen. Zij wonen in Waco, Texas, waar ze hebben ook andere communidades, andere communities, rond de wereld.
Ja.
Werkelijk rond de wereld.
Ja, daar zijn trophy communities rond de wereld.
Ja, en zij wonen, nou ja, we kunnen je hastig vielleicht meer wat opvoeden, maar zij wonen en leven taub, maar ze hebben alle ihre eigen zaken.
Ja, so als nächstes Hotatola.
Dat is niks als Hotatola, dat is niks als Amish ook niet.
No.
Nicht? Er ist vielleicht viel doller als die Mennoniten.
Ja, dat lijkt zich zo met de Mennoniten. Zij namen zich ook, ze zijn Anabaptist, krijgt zoals wie Mennoniten ook worden.
Ja, wir kommen von der anabaptistischen Movement her, nicht?
Ja, that's right.
Klar. Und so, eine sehr gesehene und reiche Verhandlung, was wir gehört haben. Wir hoffen, das kann auch ein Segen sein für andere. Wenn ihr auch gleichen tun, dann kriegst du es immer, teilt das mit, lud deine Freunde an. Was noch, Benny? Was wäre noch sagen?
No, I mean, ik glaube, dat is fijn explained. Ik glaube, schon de vraag waren holen, dat zijn 3 verschillende video's. En die waren ook op audio uitgekomen, zoals je in de podcast. So, aber die zijn op Engels. So, bloß das erste Part war op Plattdeutsch zijn, waar we hier nu staan. Aber das ewige is op Engels. So, viele von unseren Zuhörern entschuldigen uns. Wir weiter das betrüblich, wegen der Sprachkrieg, aber das muss wir nicht recht in Traduction haben. So. Ik heb dat nog gezien voor dat we de Engels gaan.
Ja, ja, korrekt. Así es. Nog ergens wat, Benny?
Ik geloof dat is alles.
Bueno, dann sagen wir noch sehr viel Dankeschön. Für jemand ans Tipp sein, wenn jeder gleichen tun, dort merkt, schickt das wieder, WhatsApp, ich glaube, wir sind nicht auf Instagram, aber auf YouTube, wo wir nicht sind, und Spotify und Google Podcast, auch auf iPhone Podcast, oder?
iPhone Podcast en Spotify, Google Podcast have updated.
Really?
Ik kan het niet meer vinden, dus dat heeft gestopt.
Oh, okay. So, weil wir sehen, wo wir das nicht wollen bekommen, aber auf YouTube und Spotify, ja.
Yes.
Und auf WhatsApp.
Ja, WhatsApp will we check.
Perfect. Okay. So, viel Dankeschön. Sehen wir uns nächste Woche. Hey, welcome everybody to the Benny and Rene show. I know you guys have probably not seen me do that live because we've not been on video, but now you put the sign to the voice. Hey, Benny, thank you so much for being here today.
Amen.
We have such an awesome couple of gentlemen here with us today.
Amen.
Hey, today we have, why don't you please introduce yourself?
I'm Ossie Adams from Texas, and it's great to be here. This is my first time in Chihuahua. I've been in Mexico a couple times, but been enjoying great fellowship with Benny and his family and friends.
That's awesome.
And I'm Dan Lancaster, and I've been down here. This will be my fourth time to Cuauhtemoc. Been enjoying Benny and Erna's hospitality several times now over the past year, getting to meet people and enjoying it. So been good. I'm also from Waco.
You're also from Waco, Texas. So you're both from Waco, Texas.
That's right.
Awesome. All right. Well, we have some questions and some, I guess, I don't want to call them doubts, but we definitely would like to learn a lot from this session. So unless, Benny, you have a question to start off with, why don't we just dive right in? I see you have a lot of questions there. That's you used an invisible ink pen there. Very good.
This is a secret session here.
Yeah, that's the secret one. So I would like to start, if you guys could just give a bit of context, where you guys are from, what you do, and well, let's start with that first.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're located in Central Texas, and yet we have communities around the country and spreading around the world right now. And I think that we embrace the Anabaptist tradition. We call ourselves Anabaptists, and we have Baylor University there at Waco highlights us as an example of the Anabaptist faith in the area.
I did not know that.
So they'll bring out classes and focus on Anabaptist studies at our place and engage us in ongoing dialogue, even though that's a Baptist university.
Right.
So we have good relationship with them. And yet we're not like a lot of Anabaptist groups in that we don't have a 500-year genealogy of parents and grandparents behind us. Instead, our community is 50 years old, 52 years old now, and it started with people in the 1970s having a very powerful, life-transforming experience with God. These people came from a non-church background. They did not know the Lord. Some of them were atheists, some of them were nominal Christians, Lutherans, and so on and so forth. And they had an experience with the love of Jesus that transformed their life. And they went into evangelism and started a church, and they slowly took steps out of mainline Christianity, or they were never quite mainline, but out of more typical Christianity, they took steps toward community.
Okay.
And what drove that was the idea that beliefs were not enough. They weren't powerful enough, and even personal experiences were not enough. People needed a supportive culture to fight against the encroaching culture of the world.
Okay.
And so community became the broader culture where new believers could sustain their faith. People who were being set free from drug addiction and coming from broken families, they needed more than a belief system and even a personal experience. They needed those, but they needed it in the context of a community. And so they took a journey first from a mission church in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, a very dangerous neighborhood. They took a journey to the other side of the river, to New Jersey, and from there they started planting gardens, and they started realizing that the ideal culture that God ordained for man was something that was at least rooted in the land. That the land taught us humility, it taught us rhythms, it taught us dependence on God and each other, and that's God put man in the garden, and so we needed to get back to that kind of culture. That the urban culture was man's answer and rejection to God. It wasn't what God had designed from the beginning. And so in 1979, our congregation made a massive exodus where 130 some people or more picked up and moved to the country.
From where to where?
From New Jersey to Colorado.
Oh, wow. Okay.
1,800 miles, I believe it is.
Okay.
And it was a slow process, but they eventually acquired a piece of land, and they started 2 communities at the same time, one in Texas, one in Colorado.
Both at the same time?
Yep.
Okay.
Both pretty much starting around 1980.
Okay.
And one was more of a house church in Texas, and one was more of a agricultural community in Colorado. But in time, we relocated to Texas and consolidated our efforts there. And so it took 10 years, and in 1990, we located the property that became kind of the hub of our community. And from 1990 to about 2013, we focused our efforts there. We had one congregation in Mexico at that point and one congregation in Idaho. But since 2013, we have been planting more communities in other places. Oftentimes not even planting, just hearing people who were interested and then going and trying to impart the vision and the ideal, the vision of this community life. So that's kind of what we're about. We're about the church. We're about vibrant Christian faith. We call ourselves Anabaptists, but we see the community movement as something that is not from the past, but something that God is offering now in the present.
So just to recap, so you guys started somewhere in New York.
Yeah.
So that's where you had
Manhattan.
in Manhattan you had
Mission.
so you had some couples get together and said, you know what, we want a different way of life, and whatever isn't working, we want it to start working, so we're going to change some things.
We had a couple. My parents were sent as missionaries to the Lower East Side of Manhattan. They were Texans, but they were sent. They were evangelists traveling the country, and they were sent to go start a mission church in the most dangerous block of New York City.
Okay, and this was back when?
1973.
1973. Okay.
And that's what they did. So they they rented a terrible flat, no hot water, extremely dangerous area, and they went and started a mission church right there in the worst part of Manhattan, New York.
Oh, wow.
And people started coming to Christ. Unbelievers started being converted. Jews became believers in Jesus. People
To this church that they started.
It was
Okay.
just the 2 of them, and then people started coming to that church. And that church grew.
And was that church of a certain denomination?
They started out as a Pentecostal church, but they were never about the denomination. It was always much more of a local family, and they separated from the Pentecostal context by 79. They had parted ways.
Okay.
So yeah.
It was that before or after you guys moved to Colorado?
Before.
Before you moved to Colorado. Okay. So you guys start, or there's this couple that starts the church in a dangerous part of Manhattan in the early 70s.
Yep.
After a while, the church grows, and then you move to Colorado.
Yes.
You
We moved first to New Jersey.
First to New Jersey,
Yes.
and then to Colorado, and you buy some land because you're saying, hey, the city life is not very conducive. It's not very good of an environment to raise families or to, okay. And then you buy some land in Colorado?
Well, we moved to Colorado and yes, eventually bought community land. And these folks were poor. These folks were former taxi drivers, and
So this group
yes,
that moved from New Jersey.
yes,
Okay.
they were not wealthy, well-to-do folks. So some of them were former taxi drivers and former bookstore clerks, and some of them had never had a job. And so, as a community, we purchased that land as a church.
As a church, you purchased it.
So that everybody could have access to this journey into the new life. because people didn't have the money to buy their own land. And eventually that would change, but at the start, it was just one piece of community land.
So they were not farmers per se.
No.
They were city people.
That's right.
So they had no farming experience.
None whatsoever.
Ranching, anything
No,
like that?
not at all. They
Okay.
were total urban dwellers, and they had to learn how to farm. Not only to farm, but to farm with horses.
Oh, how come? Why not with equipment?
Well, the journey toward farming was not a money-making proposition. It was a culture-making proposition.
So
It was not a money-making proposition. So you didn't farm to try and make a living.
Correct. We
Really?
farmed- Correct.
I mean, I know some farmers like that, but I didn't know that was a decision that you actually make. Okay, so you did it to create a culture. So that was the purpose.
yes.
Yes.
So why?
So the idea is that modern life has effectively separated us from the essentials of life. God called man to till the soil, to build his own homes, to participate in what life required, the essentials of life. And technology is very useful in many areas, but when it separates you from the direct contact with nature and with those essentials of life, it has a way of separating you from some of the grace of God, some of the blessing of creation and of nature. And so farming for us wasn't about making money. Most of us were employed in other jobs. Farming was about growing our own food and connecting our families and ourselves to each other and to nature.
Okay, so that brings me to maybe a different type of a question, but just to understand. So would you say that living in a city is wrong? Or maybe even to lighten up the question, can a believer thrive in a city?
Yes, a believer can thrive in his faith in the city, but the question is the city a culture designed to support Christian faith? And the answer is no. The city is a culture designed to replace Christian faith.
In what way?
Well, in creation, everything around us points to God. We look up at the stars and we think of the heavens that declare the glory of God. And we look at our fields and we pray for rain so that the harvest can come in. And
So we're dependent more on God.
we're dependent on God. Everything points to his handiwork. In the city, everything points to man's handiwork.
So we depend more on Walmart.
Yes, it glorifies man and his works.
Yeah.
So we look up and we see the lights of the city. The people who left New York had literally never seen the stars, many of them.
Because it's so bright in the city, you look up and you can't see the stars.
Correct.
Understood.
And we realize that from the beginning of the story of faith, God had been calling people out of cities back into relationship with the land.
So, for example, like who?
Abraham.
Okay.
Abraham was a citizen of the largest city of his time, Ur of Mesopotamia.
Oh, wow.
He was a very rich man. He was advanced in science for that time. And we're told that one night while looking at the stars, he hears God tell him to come out and to go to a land that God will show him. And so he makes this exodus out of the busiest, biggest, most powerful city of his time, and he goes out into the wilderness. And he starts a relationship with God. And this is the story of the children of Israel leaving Egypt. They're in this powerful urban center where great buildings are being constructed and great projects are underway, and God calls them out. And again, they go to a land that God will give them. This is the same story in the days of Nehemiah, where the people are captives in the land of Babylon, also Mesopotamia, but they're in the city of Babylon, and they're urban dwellers. And again, Nehemiah leads them on an exodus back to the land of their origins. And so, in general, this is a theme of God's relationship with man. We're not at all saying that people can't be Christians in the city. That's how our church started.
Right. Okay.
We're just saying that the city is not the ideal culture for growing families, and especially for supporting fragile new faith.
Okay. That's an excellent, actually, comparison there. And then, but that kind of left me spinning there a bit, because you keep going back to working the land and being in contact with nature, God's creation. How about if I'm just not a farmer? Like, I mean, I can't produce what Benny can produce. So this guy's got a farm, and I mean a garden. Okay, a garden. For me, that's a farm.
Yeah.
Okay, because I don't come from that place. So, do I have to produce my own food?
No.
Or elaborate on that a little bit more.
Well, I mean, I'm going to pivot to Dan here because I want his input, but our community is a large cross-section of professionals and tradesmen and people who make their living. I would say less than 5% would make their living directly from the farm. But
less than 5%.
Correct. But all of us, 100% of us, are rooted in a rural culture. All of us have gardens. We don't live in the city. We collaborate on sharing crops and growing food for each other. And all of us have chickens. All of us have a land-rooted lifestyle, but we're not trying to be farmers. We recognize that not everybody's called to be. I'm not a farmer.
Okay.
But I have a huge garden, and I have
Okay.
30 hens, and I have 100 sheep, and
Oh, wow.
you know, so we have a land-rooted lifestyle. My kids milk in the mornings by hand, the milk we drink.
Right.
My younger kids gather the eggs from the hens that we raise. My wife and children tend the garden. You know, we have this life that is connected to the land, much like it was in America 100 years ago.
Right.
But we're not saying that we're farmers. I'm not called to be a farmer. I'm called to be a pastor and a writer and other things. And so I'm not trying to pretend that I have the gift to be a farmer. But my life is connected to the land. I'm going to pivot to Dan. You got to come into this.
Well, I think also the Bible comes to life when you are familiar with agricultural motifs and you actually are experiencing those sheep and that soil and so forth. And the parables of Jesus, for example, come alive in new ways. So it's one of the many advantages that helps your faith to flourish, because these aren't just stories from some antiquated culture that you have no connection with anymore. You've had your hands in the dirt. You've worked with rocky soil versus cultivated soil. You've had that sheep get lost that you had to go find. I just had to do that this last week. Lost a few of my sheep. We had a predator attack in the night, and they busted through the fence, and the neighbors were calling and saying, "I just spotted your sheep over here on the hill," and we were going out to find them. But anyway, I'm just saying that all of this, and this is very impactful, especially to the young, especially to our children, to be able to be in the kind of environment where they're learning cause and effect. They're learning consequence to actions. They're learning the need for long-term perseverance. So modern industrialized technological culture teaches us instant gratification. You need something, you flip the switch and it happens. You order it off of Amazon and get it the next day, or maybe the same day, or whatever. We're not saying those things are intrinsically evil. I order things from Amazon. That's not the point. The point is that an immersion in an industrialized technological culture is not connecting us as immediately with the Lord or with our family members or with our church community as is an agricultural context. So it's not like it's this doctrinal thing for us, like you can't be saved unless you are a farmer. We don't believe that at all. But it's a recognition that culture matters. And really the farm is just one element of that. When you referenced earlier that when God made man and he created the ideal environment, he placed him in a garden to tend it. So we see that as a motif from the beginning. But what's more important than the garden is that man walked with God.
Right.
He was in the presence of God. It says he walked with him in the cool of the day. Many English translations will say, but the word there is ruach in the Hebrew. He walked with, which is spirit. He walked with him in the spirit. So it's like there was this relationship between God and his creatures that was flourishing in this context. And then when sin enters the world, all of a sudden, Adam, where are you? And a separation from the nearness of God has taken place. So we're not trying to emphasize unduly the agricultural nature of it. We're saying what we're trying to emphasize primarily is proper connection with God.
Okay.
That's first. Proper connection with God, being able to feel the presence of God, being able to hear his voice and follow him, having that direct connection primarily with God, and then secondarily with the other people that he has created us to dwell in our marriages, in our families, with our children and grandchildren. And then tertiary, or on a third level, would be with his creation. And so we see all of that working together symbiotically, where
Where one depends on the other,
Exactly.
or one helps the other.
exactly, where all of this works together with the prime goal being restoration to right relationship with God. So this can happen. This can happen in the context of the city, for example. People can have a good marriage in the city. They can have a good prayer life in the city. That we're not saying it can't happen. We're just saying there's an awareness, and this comes from the Scripture. This comes from your father was preaching in the early days from, I think, is it Psalm 137? I think, where it's from the Babylonian captivity, and it says, "By the rivers of Babylon we sat down and wept. We hung up our harps in the willows, because there our captors asked of us a song. But how can we sing the songs of the Lord while we're in a foreign land?" And the word there is soil, a foreign soil. It's like, how can we sing the Lord's song? How can we find the harmony and the resonance that we're looking for when we're in a foreign culture?
Right.
And there was this dream that we could return to the inheritance, return to the ideals that God created for us to live in. And so we see that geographically from Babylon to the Promised Land in Israel, but we feel like that there is much to be gained from a cultural exodus where they may be the Lord's people, but they can hear a call that says, "Come out of her, my people, and I will be a father, and you will be my sons and daughters." That's this New Testament call that is still for believers today, where God is calling to his children that are in Babylon, culturally speaking. We're not talking about a city in Iraq somewhere.
Right.
We're talking about a cultural phenomenon. And he's saying, "Come out of her and be my people." And so whether that means geographically moving somewhere or not, it may or may not mean that. The point is that there can be a cultural shift that affects our thinking, it affects our consciousness of God. And if we can be intentional about that and be asking the question, "Lord, what are the aspects of my life, of my children's life, of our church's life that can bring us closer to you? What are the ways in which we live that are distracting us, that are pulling us away from the things of the Spirit, that are not producing the fruit of the Spirit? What can we change? What would God lead us to change in order to be closer to him and closer to each other?" So the farm is just really just one.
Is it just
Many facets.
one of those many things, right?
Have you found that it produces the fruit that your parents were looking for at the beginning?
Very much. I mean, one of the things that we see in the church that is so disturbing is the loss of young people from the faith of their parents. There's hardly a church group that would not just really fret over the loss of their young people. And we have seen a complete reversal of that trend. Do we lose young people? Yes. We lose a small minority of young people. But the vast majority of young people stay, because it's not merely a tradition or a belief system. It's a whole way of life that is combined with a vibrancy in the spirit, a substance in the truth. And our young people have something that they feel like they can become part of that is not dead and stagnant and of their parents' generation, but is for today. So yes, we would say that the fruit has been everything that we hoped for and more in terms of being able to see a generational continuity.
Going back a little bit, Dan, you mentioned something about, and you used the word industrialized. And so just so I can understand, well, you know that I'm in industry, I'm in manufacturing, and I'm always trying to figure out how to make my factory one step bigger, one step larger, and just to understand. And I see a lot of the pros and cons to all of that, but from your guys' perspective, it almost sounds as if you're saying, hey, keep the business smaller, not bigger. Is it more of a concept of quality versus quantity? Is industrialization wrong in your minds? What can you guys say to that?
I would say where we're going to run into the most trouble with industrialization is when that type of thinking and that model gets applied to human relationships. Okay, so why do we specialize in business? Why do we automate in factories? Why do we create assembly line mass production? We do it because it's efficient. We do it because we can make more money that way. We can get more product for cheaper input, and we can lower prices and be more competitive. This is all going to relate primarily to economic success.
For sure.
And we found that families don't work that way. You don't want to industrialize your children.
Right.
You don't want to industrialize your marriage or industrialize the church, where we're just trying to process people.
And become as efficient as at any cost. Exactly. Right. It doesn't mean you don't want to be efficient, but not at any cost.
That's right. Okay. So we're not saying that there's an evil in efficiency per se. It's what is lost in the process while we're trying to save money or make money. Right. That money should not be our measurement for the things that are the most valuable in life. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. But we're instructed by Christ, don't worry about what you're going to eat and what you're going to wear. The pagans run after these things. Like we've got to figure this out. We've got to do it bigger and better and faster and so forth. But we see that rat race is destructive to relationships. And all you have to do is look around you to the many families that are broken by people who are completely immersed and consumed with making money over and above paying attention to the organic emotional needs within their marriages or within their children or whatever. A good example of what we were talking about earlier about the facets of culture, right, that impact our relationships would be education. And that's a place where we have made some radical decisions, where we, in our community, all of the children are homeschooled. They're educated at home. And that's been a conscious decision to extract from a more industrial model of educating children. So when we look at for example, the public education system in America, we see a model that's built on efficiency. It's built on one size fits all. It's built on a conformity model. It's training citizens to be good agents of the state. Yeah, right. Exactly. And it's efficient. Right. You can put a bunch of kids in one room, and then you can hire professional teachers, and you can get a good student-teacher ratio, and you can run the whole thing like a machine, and you can crank out good citizens. Right. But how's that working out? Jesus says, judge a tree by its fruit. And it may be producing people who know how to make money sometimes. It may sometimes even produce people that are educated. It doesn't even do a really great job at that in our experience. But we say, well, this is a child that is unique, that is crafted, that is made in the image of God, that has been entrusted to his parents. No one loves that child like the parents do. No one has their best interest at heart like the parents do. And so no one is more capable of truly being responsible for the well-being of this child than the parents. And so we've made some radical steps. That was also early on in our community's journey to say, well, we're going to extract from a system that bears bad fruit, where our children, the Bible says that bad company corrupts good character. And so we're going to pull them into a context that God designed, that we see is a biblical model for education, instead of this peer pressure laden environment supervised by people that we don't even really know. What's your teacher's name, son? And bring them into the context of the family and the church community. Paul wrote to Timothy, see if I'll quote this exactly right here. I probably won't, but he wrote to Timothy and he says, to continue in the things that you have learned, knowing who you learned them from. He's referring to his mother and his grandmother who were in the faith. And we see that there's a model of education that can give our children the best chance of following in the footsteps of faith.
So, talking about education and your homeschooling system and so on, do you have any professions or professionals, or I guess the public school system would have a process or a system where you go through these different levels of schooling, eventually you get to college and to university, and then you become a lawyer, an engineer, a doctor, et cetera, et cetera. So what kind of process or system do you have so that people can become professionals?
So I think the basic question that anybody has to ask about education as a kind of a starting premise is, what are we educating for? Okay. What's the purpose of this education? Are we training our children because we want them to be competitive in the business market? Is that top priority? Is that where they're going to find fulfillment in life? Is that where they're going to find their meaning and purpose in life? And it seems to us that a lot of professional education, if you will, or we might call it industrialized education models, are trying to create people that fit into an economic system, a political system, and to create integers that will make that thing run efficiently. And then people are told, if you can make enough money, you'll be happy. If you can have enough comforts and conveniences, your life will have meaning. We don't buy that. We think that's a farce. That's not really where people find happiness. That's not where they find their purpose. So as believers, we're going to have different goals. We're going to have different models than just the general public in a secular society. And so we start off with a question: what is the goal? What are we educating for? I want my children to be followers of Christ. I want my children to have meaningful relationships. You know, you can look at pretty much any study that's been done on human happiness, and the indicators for what really makes people happy and fulfilled and grateful for their course in life at the end of their life, and you're not going to find that it was making money or that it was becoming famous or some of these things. You're going to find people saying, the most meaningful thing I did was to raise my children. The most meaningful thing I did was that I gave my time as a volunteer service here or there or whatever.
You added value to someone's life.
I mattered to someone else. Yeah, I added value to someone's life. That we're hardwired by God to find meaning in those things. And so our entire educational approach is, yes, it has some systemization. It's not that it's just well, kids, everybody love Jesus and things are going to be fine. No, you still have to learn your 3 R's, as they used to say, and all of that. There's a lot to learn. We emphasize education quite strongly. We feel like our kids have got to have a sense of history. We were discussing that earlier. They need to know where they came from, what are the dynamics that have informed the world that we live in today, so that we can either appreciate what's good about it and carry that on, or we can recognize what's wrong with it so that we can change courses. So they need to have a sense of history. They need to understand mathematics. They need to understand especially how to read, how to write, how to express themselves in speaking and in writing, because they need to know how to think critically and not just swallow what's brought to them. They need to have enough of a background in all of these topics that they are prepared to face life, to stand on their own 2 feet and be accountable to God and make responsible decisions. So our goals are not going to be to train our children to fit into an economic system. Yes, they need to be able to make a living. That's biblical. That's necessary. Your Heavenly Father knows that you need these things. That's going to be part of it. But it isn't primary. Right. They're going to be focusing on when we're teaching and training our children, we're looking for the character of Christ. We're saying this is a soul that is made in the image of God and needs to be conformed to the image of His Son. Because this is a child that has a carnal nature, has a flesh, it has an inclination away from God, that's been in the world since sin entered the world. And they're going to need guidance. They're going to need help. But the point, the goal, is to be like Jesus. So what system, what relationships, what curriculum is going to advance us towards that goal as efficiently as possible?
Right. No, and I think that's a great answer, but I still have I can clearly see that I have an abundance of ignorance, in myself, not understanding truly and completely how it is exactly that your community works. But when you do need, and maybe you don't need, but I'm assuming if you do need a certified lawyer, because and I'll use that term because I can study the law and call myself a lawyer, but I'm saying a certified lawyer, or I need a doctor, etc. Do you promote that? How does that work in your community?
So we have a standardized curriculum. So kids start school at the same time as you would see generally in the public, around 5, 6, 7, based on the student's readiness. But they're going to go through standard grades, the 12 grades. They're going to have testing twice a year, evaluations by a church overseen school with a board of directors who evaluate their grades and can supplement and help if any child's falling behind. So the parents are very supported in a systematic curriculum that takes kids through the 12 basic grades. And then at the conclusion of their standard scholastic, at the conclusion of high school, the kid is going to have already likely started on a career path through an apprenticeship with someone who has a skill that he wants to realize in his own life. So even at graduation, the kids will do a keystone project where they will graduate with some epic accomplishment or project that generally shows the direction they are inclined to take. So maybe they'll present some furniture that they've made, or maybe a book that they've written, or various things that kind of show their education and the apprenticeship that they're leaning toward. And most of our kids are going to find employment in the service businesses, craft businesses, or those businesses owned by members, privately owned by members in the community.
Okay.
Now, if someone needs to be a doctor or a lawyer or
something more technically specific,
for sure, and a lot of our businesses require that, but even the state allows it to be trained through apprenticeship. So somebody can become a certified plumber or a certified electrician.
Right, okay.
A lot of those trades, we have a lot of those kinds of businesses, and it leads young people into businesses that are run by brothers in the church, where they have accountability, character training, and so on and so forth. But in terms of a doctor or a lawyer, that would be more the exception.
Sure.
We would say that what we would look for is a calling, that the young person feels a calling to serve their church and the broader public in this way. And that would be something where the church would help them then go through that course, go through the
process, whatever that is.
Exactly.
Right.
8 years of college or whatever.
Yeah.
And it would be an exception, and it would be done with the community feeling that this was a calling that God had given them.
For sure, absolutely.
And they would be much more equipped to start college than their counterparts. Our kids are more educated at graduation. Generally speaking, they're much more educated than their counterparts in Connolly High School down the road. We have a PhD philosophy professor, and she says that when she teaches a course to our high school students, and she says the essays she gets from our high school students exceed that of graduate students she taught at Baylor.
Wow.
No diss against Baylor, but
No.
So they are highly educated, generally speaking. Of course, not every kid is the same. There are learning disabilities and challenges, and we're not a perfect model. But generally speaking, if a kid wanted to take that approach, we're not training them to find their place in the world. We're training them to find their place in the culture of the community.
Right.
But if they had that calling, they would be equipped to do that. And we see that. We see people becoming professionals in that.
And I've definitely seen and sensed that from the very few times I've visited your community, that that your children, and kind of segueing into that, they are not only well educated, right, by how they speak, respond, and by the way they carry themselves, but they're extremely well behaved, generally speaking. I mean, so I'm broad stroking that because I don't know every child in your community. But that leads me to a question. I totally now understand your education system a lot better. But why are your kids so well behaved? I mean, do you tie them down or something, or?
Tying them down will not lead to good behavior.
Okay, yes, you're right. That's right. No, I mean that was a terrible joke, but I mean, like, but how is it possible? Because when I went to the affair that you guys had last year around November, December, and I saw so many of your kids interacting within that fair setting, with outsiders like myself and with others, and I mean, my wife and I were just saying, well, how is it possible that these kids are so well behaved? Like, why are they not throwing more tantrums and yelling and screaming more? And why are they so courteous and professional at such a young age? And how in the world did you achieve that?
I have a book on Amazon. It's called Child Training.
I love it. No, like for reals?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, good.
It's with my full name, Asael, with Asahel Adams, Child Training, a modern guide to parenting in the 21st century. So, but let me just say this.
I'm totally buying that book. I mean, my youngest is 18, but I'm buying that book for sure. Okay.
Everything we've done as a community was for our children.
Right.
And I say that as one of those children. I was raised and educated entirely in the context of our community. And so everything my parents did was for our second and third and fourth generation. So it should be that the most distinct fruit we would see was a different model in the outcome of children.
Right.
So, but let me make an observation. We go to a horse show, and we see a horse that can sit down, lie down, roll over, stand up, do all these things for a trainer, and we say, I want to know that model of training.
Right.
But we see children that are well behaved, and we say, is something wrong?
It's almost that bad, like in today's context, for sure.
Almost, it is.
No, yeah, no.
And the reason is because as parents,
Right.
we feel guilty when we see someone's kids who are really well behaved, because we think, why aren't mine that well behaved? And we've been given this model of training children that I think is utterly broken. It starts with Dr. Spock, and it's spread through the entire church, and it's garbage. And the outcome of modern parenting is horrible. Traditional parenting didn't have gun violence in schools. Traditional parenting didn't have the bullying that we see in American public education. Traditional parenting did not have the drug abuse, the unemployment, the madness. So I would like to just call foul on the whole model of modern parenting.
I completely agree.
It does not work. And it has more broken relationships, it has more abuse, it has more violence. In the name of celebrating the child and giving them their freedom, it has created an environment that is more dangerous for children than any we have ever known in Western civilization. So it's a complete myth, and it's designed by the devil to ruin the lives of children. But I would just point out that in the training of animals, it used to be that the model was beat the horse, break the horse, and that's how you get these good outcomes.
Okay.
Today, the best trainers are called horse whisperers. They don't beat the horse. They're not coercive. They're developing
violent.
They're not violent. They're developing a relationship of trust.
Right.
And I think that there is a model of parenting that is brutal and is horrible, and we reject that entirely.
Okay.
But there is a model of parenting where we don't look at the child as a problem or as an aside, but we look at the child as the future, and we build our businesses for our families, and we choose our We choose where and how we live for our families, and we integrate our children in the totality of our lives. Compartmentalization is part of the problem with child training. And
Wait
yet,
a minute, but what do you mean that? Like,
okay, so when the mother, when the kids wake up and go one place to a school, and a mother goes to another place for her job, and a father goes to another place for his job, and the youngest kids go to daycare, we have compartmentalized the family. This is the industrial model imposed on the family. And yet, if I go back to Dan's comment, your question about economy, you know, we think of economy as relating to money,
right.
but it doesn't. The word economy comes from the Greek word oikonomia, and it literally means the order of the household. And so it describes the values of a family. And money is a part of that.
Sure.
But money is not the essence of that.
Absolutely.
And so economy, if when seen as household rules or the order of the household, it starts to show what you value most. And what we value most is our children, is our family. And yes, there are techniques of training. We would say, you know, connection. It starts with connection. There has to be connection. There has to be affection. There has to be connection. There has to be love above and before all else. There has to be consistency and consequence, and there has to be reward and incentive and all of these dynamics. It's all important. All of it's important.
Sure.
But the bigger picture is what lifestyle, what culture have we planted our children in? Are we in this compartmentalized model, or are we starting to come back into a model that supports wholeness and integration instead of disintegration?
Okay.
There's so much more that could be said about it. But, you know, you asked about the business. Business has an essential role, and money is one of the objects of business. But money cannot be an ultimate object. Nobody wants to have money that buys nothing.
Right.
So money is only good as what it buys.
For sure.
And then we ask, so what do we want to buy more than anything else? We want to buy relationships that hold together.
Health. And all that.
Health. We want to buy health. We want to buy joy. We want to buy meaning. And so if we spend our energy to acquire money to buy things, that's the wrong value system.
It's a backwards process almost, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if we spend our energy to build relationships that last, to bring health to our children, to bring joy, then that's the right kind of economy. And it generally speaking, we do end up with, we want to get the best bang for our buck. We want to get the best profits for our energy, but we're not trying to build business for the sake of bigger business, and we're not trying to make money for the sake of making money. We're trying to build an entire life that supports the highest value, which is relationship. And so if I'm counseling a father who is spending too much time on his business, what is he buying with that time? He's trading that time for money, but he can't use that money to get back his son.
Right.
So he needs to give up some of that money and spend more time with his son. There's got to be a value change. And that's where if we say, what purpose does, you know, I like to say this. I say if money is the servant of relationship, it is fulfilling God's purpose. But when relationships become the servant of money, that's idolatry.
I like that. Going to that concept of compartmentalized.
Yes.
That's the way the world is currently structured and working for the most part. And I don't want to say everywhere, but for the most part.
Right.
And what you're saying makes a lot of sense. But to remove yourself from that, in most cases, might seem economically impossible.
But it's not.
No, I understand that, but how?
You have to simplify your life. It's like the world has been designed to convince you to want things you don't need. We shifted from a needs-based economy to a wants-based economy. So then it becomes all about the manipulation of the person's emotions. So I've got to convince you that you need a pair of sunglasses that you don't actually need. Your $15 pair is fine, but I got to convince you that in order to fit in, you need these $200 pair. and I got to convince you that you need a hairstyle that you don't actually need. Your local barber is fine, but you got to get this one that's 3 times as expensive. And I got to convince you that you need to buy these shoes. And so it's all about the current economy is all about the manipulation of people's emotions to promise them relational connection through products. If you buy this, you belong to this group. If you buy that, you look like so-and-so. I want to be part of that. So they tap into our longing for connection and tell us if we buy things that make them rich, somehow we'll magically be connected to the group that looks like that and has that beautiful car and has that beautiful marriage. And it's all a manipulation. But if we simplify, and within reason, but if we simplify and we say, I don't need to wear that. I don't need to live like that. I don't need to dress like that. I don't need to go there. What really matters to me? What really is important? Our life does become more cost effective.